we present sample optimal and computationally efficient algorithms for learning tree-structured Ising models. The broader challenge is to learn to, within total variation distance, a high-dimensional distribution over the n-dimensional hypercube to which sample access is provided. While we have a tight understanding of the sample complexity required to solve this problem, the sample complexity is unsatisfactory because it's useless for large dimensions, and it's a worst-case bound, which becomes invalid for distributions that have structure. The goal in this talk is to revisit this problem and provide optimal algorithms for learning high-dimensional distributions with structure. In particular, we'll do so for tree-structured Ising models, which is the same class of distributions as binary alphabet tree-structured Bayes nets and Markov random fields. The Ising model specifies a distribution over the n-dimensional hypercube whose log density is a bilinear function of the underlying variables. The bilinear function is determined by a symmetric interaction matrix with a zero diagonal and a vector of external fields. It was proposed as a simple model to study phase transitions in materials and has found many applications in statistical physics, computer vision, social network analysis, game theory, computational biology, and many other fields. Given sample access to an Ising model with interaction matrix J and external fields H, the goal is to estimate J hat and H hat so that the two models are epsilon close in total variation distance. This task is called proper learning because the goal is to learn a model from the same family as the one that is being sampled. From an information theoretic standpoint, it is known that this problem can be solved from an efficient sample size. From a computational perspective, a long line of research culminating in an exciting thread of recent work has shown that Ising models can be estimated computationally efficiently under assumptions about the strengths of the interactions, namely upper and lower bounds on the absolute entries of the interaction matrix. A different thread of work in probability and statistics, culminating in a recent work with Yuval Tagan and Vardis Kandiros in the same conference, has even provided single sample parameter estimation algorithms under more assumptions about the interaction matrix. In this work, we make no assumptions whatsoever about the strengths of the interactions, but we assume that the Ising model has a tree structure. Under these assumptions, we provide computationally efficient and sample optimal algorithms that need n log n over epsilon squared samples. To be clear, an Ising model has tree structure if the interaction matrix viewed as a weighted adjacency matrix defines a tree. In this case, an alternative way to describe the model is to provide the marginal distribution for every edge of that tree. A classical algorithm for learning tree-structured Ising models is the Chai-Liu algorithm. Using samples, it estimates the mutual information between every pair of variables. It then builds a maximum spanning tree of the complete graph whose edge weights are the estimated mutual informations between every pair of nodes. It then outputs the Ising model that has the maximum spanning tree as the underlying graph and the empirical marginal as the marginal on every edge of that tree. Work of Chow and Wagner has shown that the algorithm is consistent. That is, the output distribution converges to the true one as the number of samples goes to infinity. In this work, we show that Chai-Liu is an efficient and sample optimal proper learner of Ising models. Specifically, we show that given n log n over delta over epsilon squared samples from an Ising model with a tree structure, and using empirical estimates of all the quantities, the output of Chai-Liu will be epsilon close in total variation distance to the true model with probability at least 1 minus delta. To be clear, we are not claiming that Chai-Liu will identify the correct tree. I will argue soon that this is impossible to do from a finite number of samples. But we do argue that Chai-Liu will succeed in finding a model that is close to the true one in total variation distance. We now provide a short discussion of our result and contributions. First, a matching lower bound to our upper bound was provided in an online manuscript by Frederick Koller. Moreover, parallel work by Bhattacharya et al. In the same conference has also provided an upper bound on the sample complexity required by Char-Liu. This is suboptimal by a factor of log n over epsilon, which is inherent in their proof. However, their proof is simpler than ours, and it works for larger, discrete alphabets. And moreover, it learns the model within epsilon squared in KL, which implies epsilon in TV. Our proof is tight, but more involved. And we have only worked it out for binary alphabets, so Ising models. An additional benefit of our proof is that it characterizes the potential structural mistakes that Char-Liu will make, and in particular can be used to define a data structure computed on the output of the algorithm, which characterizes those mistakes. Finally, our proof provides a deterministic condition for success. Specifically, we show that the output of Char-Liu will be epsilon close in TV to the true model, as long as the empirical distribution over the sample provided as input to the algorithm satisfies a deterministic condition with respect to the true distribution. This deterministic condition is called strong for consistency. Specifically, we're going to say that the distribution P hat satisfied strong for consistency with respect to P if for all sets of 4 nodes and all events involving those nodes, P hat and P agree in the probability they assign to those events in a muted multiplicative way shown here, depending on the size of the event. It is easy to show that strong for consistency will be satisfied with probability at least 1 minus delta given n log n over delta over epsilon squared samples. Thus, this lemma and theorem 1 implies our main result. I proceed to provide an overview of our proof. I'll do so for the special case of symmetric Ising models. To be precise, an Ising model is called symmetric if every variable takes each of the 2 possible values with probability 1/2. Rather than analyzing the original Char-Liu algorithm, for the purpose of this talk, we will analyze a variant of Char-Liu algorithm, which uses covariances. In particular, in step 1, it estimates the covariance between every pair of variables, and in step 2, it uses the absolute covariances as edge weights for the purpose of building a maximum spanning tree. I will note that the covariance between a pair of variables has a very simple form. I'll also note that the covariance satisfies an important multiplicativity property over paths. If I1 through Ik is a path, then the covariance between I1 and Ik is the product of the covariances of I1, I2, I2, I3, etc., Ik minus 1, Ik. What we'll show next is that given n log n over delta over epsilon squared samples from a symmetric tree-structured Ising model, this variant of the Char-Liu algorithm will output an Ising model that is epsilon close to the target with probability at least 1 minus delta. To describe our proof, we will start with some modest understanding of reconstruction errors involving subtrees with a small number of nodes, and this will motivate our broader proof plan. To begin with, it is easy to see that edges will have to be missed if the number of samples is finite. For example, if a subtree of the true model involves very strong edges, we may not be able to disambiguate those edges from a finite number of samples. The closer to 1 the absolute covariances are, the larger the number of samples we need to learn the structure. But do we really care about those types of mistakes? The same is true if you have a subtree of the true model involving very weak edges. Again, do you really care if you make mistakes in disambiguating those edges? On the other hand, when you mix edges of different strengths, more interesting phenomena arise. In this example, you might be able to tell that 2 and 3 are closer to each other than to 1, but you may not be able to tell which of the 2 vertices 1 connects to. The question is, how much do you care about these types of mistakes? And also, how do you aggregate a large number of such mistakes? To answer this, we need a quantification of those mistakes. This is what we do now. Towards this end, let's consider three nodes, I, j, and k, that lie on the path of the true model. By the multiplicativity property, the covariance between I and k is the product of the covariance between I and j and the covariance between j and k. In particular, the absolute value of alpha ik is bounded by the absolute value of alpha ij. What we want to ask is, what happens if Chai-Lu estimates them the other way around? If this is the case, then Chai-Lu will certainly not pick the right substructure for these nodes. What we want to ask is, what would happen if Chai-Lu connects I to k and k to j? We want to understand how far the marginal of the original model on I, j, and k is to an alternative distribution with a wrong structure, but which assigns the right marginals on the edges of that structure, according to the original model. What we show is that if Chai-Lu flips the order between ik and ij, and if the for consistency condition holds, then these models must be closed in squared Hellinger distance. Recall that the Hellinger distance is the L2 distance between the square roots of the probability vectors of the two distributions, and it relates to total variation distance as shown in this box. We can prove a similar lemma involving four nodes. In particular, if h, I, j, and k are on a path of the true tree, but the Chai-Lu algorithm estimates the covariance between h and k to be larger than that of I and j, then if we compare the true marginal on h, I, j, and k to the distribution that picks the wrong tree and assigns the correct marginals on pairs of nodes on that tree, then those two models must be close to each other. Given these two lemmas, called the triangle lemma and the trapezoid lemma, a very natural idea to complete our proof would be to concoct a hybrid argument that transitions between the true model P and the one output by the Chai-Lu algorithm through a sequence of edge swaps, the impact of each of which can be analyzed using these two lemmas. Unfortunately, this approach can't possibly work. First, the triangle and the trapezoid lemmas require that when swapping edges, the involved nodes lie on a path of the true model, and this cannot be maintained to hybridize between every pair of trees. Another important issue is that even if you could hybridize between a pair of trees to satisfy this property, then since every step costs root epsilon squared over n in Hellinger and hence in TV, if you were to make n steps, which you would have in the worst case scenario, then the total bound you will get in TV would be a factor of root n away from the target, which is epsilon. So we need to do something different. Our plan is to do a hybrid argument that goes between the true model P and the one output by Chai-Lu, but which has only a constant number of steps that each lose a constant factor of epsilon in TV distance. Now, to do so, each step will have to do large changes on the model. So it will be deleting, inserting, or modifying a large number of edges. To carry out this plan, we stratify the edges into groups that will be processed simultaneously using what we call a layering hierarchy. And we also provide a tool that bounds the effect on distance of swapping or modifying a large number of edges. We will start with the second tool. Suppose P and P prime are two tree-structured Ising models over variables x1 through xn. And let T and T prime be their corresponding trees, shown in blue solid edges and dashed purple edges in this picture. Now, suppose that A1 through AK is a clustering of the variables such that every cluster is both T connected and T prime connected. And moreover, whenever a pair of clusters is connected via a T edge, it is also connected via a T prime edge. If a pair of clusters is connected, call Bij the set of up to 4 endpoints involved in edges that either T connect or T prime connect those clusters. Under this structure, we show that the squared Hellinger distance between P and P prime is upper bounded by the sum over all clusters of the Hellinger squared distance between the marginal of P on the cluster and the marginal of P prime on the cluster, and the sum over all pairs of clusters that are connected of the squared Hellinger distance of the marginal of P and P prime on the set of endpoints involved in those connections. In our figure, we get that the squared Hellinger distance between P and P prime is bounded by this sum. The importance of this theorem is that on the left-hand side, we are comparing two high-dimensional distributions. And on the right-hand side, we're comparing a sum of marginals of those distributions on a hopefully smaller number of variables. Next, we provide our layering tool. If T hat is the tree underlying the model output by the Chai-Liu algorithm, we partition the edges of T hat according to their corresponding absolute estimated covariance. A T hat edge with an estimated absolute covariance that is very close to 1 is going to be called a T hat road. The connected components of T hat defined by T hat roads are going to be called cities. The next layer of T hat edges we define are those whose absolute estimated covariance lies between this threshold and 1/2. These edges are called T hat highways, and they connect cities into countries. Next, we have T hat railways whose absolute estimated covariance is between 1/2 and 2 epsilon over root n, and those connect countries into continents. All remaining T hat edges are going to be called T hat airways, and this must connect continents. Next, let me provide an example of our layering hierarchy together with some important properties for it that we establish. In the figure, I'm showing T hat roads which connect vertices into cities. An important lemma that we establish is that cities are not just T hat connected, but they're also T connected via edges that we call T roads. T roads are shown in the figure with blue edges. So again, cities are both T hat connected and T connected. In the next layer of our hierarchy, we have T hat highways, which connect cities into countries. They are shown in the figure with dashed purple edges that are less thick than the edges corresponding to T hat roads. An important lemma that we establish is that a pair of cities are connected via T hat highways if and only if they're also connected via edges of the true tree, which are called T highways. So T hat highways are parallel to T highways as shown in the figure. In the next layer of our hierarchy, we have T hat railways, which connect countries into continents. In the figure, we have a single T hat railway shown with dashed purple line that is less thick than both T hat highways and T hat roads. An important lemma that we establish is that a pair of countries are connected via T hat railways if and only if they are connected by T edges that are called T railways. So in particular, T hat railways and T railways are parallel to each other as shown in the figure. Lastly, we have T hat airways, which connect continents. By necessity, the remaining edges of T also have to connect continents. However, we are not claiming that T hat airways and T airways have to be parallel. Given the aforedescribed layering hierarchy and our square Hellinger subadditivity bound, we are ready to describe our proof. Recall that our plan is to have a constant number of steps that hybridize between the true model and the one output by Chai-Liu. The first step of our hybrid argument is to remove T airways. It can be shown that T airways have an absolute covariance that is very small. This implies that removing a single T airway, which is the same as replacing its absolute covariance with 0, changes the distribution by very little in Hellinger squared distance. Now our square-Hellinger's additivity theorem kicks in, which can be used to argue that removing all the T airways has impact that is at most n, which is the total number of possible airways, times the impact of removing a single airway. The next part of our proof is to insert T-hat airways. T-hat airways are also very small in estimated absolute covariance. So inserting a single T-hat airway changes the distribution by very little in Hellinger squared. And again, a square-Hellinger subadditivity implies that the total impact of inserting all T-hat airways is at most epsilon squared. Next, what we do is we switch railways. In particular, we replace T railways with T-hat railways. Here we can use our trapezoid or triangle lemma to argue that the impact of switching a single T railway for a parallel T-hat railway is at most epsilon squared over n in Hellinger squared. To see why, let us label the vertices that are involved in this switch with h, I, j, k, and compare the impact of the switch to this figure here. This is exactly the setting where we can apply this theorem, because h, I, j, and k are a path in the true tree, which is the blue one, and we want to switch the ij edge for the hk edge. Now, the trapezoid lemma tells us that whenever child loop refers the hk edge to the ij edge, the impact of such a switch is at most epsilon squared over n in Hellinger squared. Next, our square-Hellinger subadditivity theorem implies that the impact of switching all the T railways for their parallel T-hat railways has an impact of at most epsilon squared in Hellinger squared distance. Naturally, the next step of our hybrid argument is to switch all T highways for their parallel T-hat highways. The impact of a single such switch is epsilon squared over n by the trapezoid or the triangle lemma. And again, square-Hellinger subadditivity implies that the impact of switching all of the T highways for all of the corresponding T-hat highways is at most epsilon squared in Hellinger squared. So we're almost there. What we need now is to switch T roads for T-hat roads. To do so, we first tighten the T roads, meaning that we turn the absolute covariances from the very large value that they must have to 1. The impact of tightening a single T road is epsilon squared over n. So the impact of tightening at most n of them is at most epsilon squared. Now that our all T roads are very tight, we can switch them for very tight T-hat roads. The impact of that is 0 in Hellinger squared. Finally, we untighten the T-hat roads, and because T-hat roads are 1 before the untightening and become something very close to 1 after the untightening, again, the total impact of those switches are epsilon squared in Hellinger squared. So overall, we have a constant number of steps in our hybrid argument. Each of them costs epsilon squared in Hellinger. So the total cost is epsilon squared in Hellinger, epsilon in Hellinger, so epsilon in total variation. The asymmetric case poses important challenges deviating from the proof sketch that I just provided, but the approach can be generalized. In summary, we showed that the Child-Liu algorithm is computationally efficient and sample optimal in learning tree-structured Ising models. Our proof provides a sufficient deterministic condition for success of the algorithm and characterizes the mistakes it may make. An important open question is to find computationally efficient, proper learners of general Ising models, which we know is possible from an efficient sample due to the recent result by Devrier et al. Thank you very much.